Hey everyone, hope you've enjoyed the videos I've made. This one's going to probably be the most complicated one to date. I'm going to explain the entire front end geometry, or at least 4 different settings that go into the front end. So what you see here, let's start off with the camber and caster. Right, you can see here I've built my caster gauge. It's sitting on there. I've taken my measurements. I know where the caster is in this stock configuration at this ride height. You can see it's jacked up on a jack. And I know my caster settings, I know my camber settings. So that's 2 of the major settings involved in front end geometry. The other 2 settings is your roll center. That's the intersection point between both sides of the front suspension, where it crosses underneath the car. And then the final setting is something called anti-dive. If you look closely, you can see the upper arm mount, how it's angled. It's angled for a reason. This car from Ford is built with anti-dive in it. So these are the 4 settings that I'm concerned about in the front end. And my end goal for this is to remove this stock upper control arm mount here on each side and get rid of this stock upper A-arm mount. The reason I want to do that for is twofold. One, the way you adjust the camber and caster in this stock setup is with these 2 eccentric bolts right here. They're cammed, meaning they're oblonged. So in order to change your camber in and out and caster forward and backwards, you got to rotate these cam bolts. Additionally, the stock setup does not allow the aggressive settings we run in circle track racing. You might be able to get 2 degrees of negative camber here on the right front with this stock setup. We can run upwards of 7 or 8 degrees of negative camber. So that's the second reason to get rid of this upper A-arm mount. And I guess then the third reason is this is the fun part of designing a car, engineering how the suspension is going to work. And when I replace this setup with the setup I have designed, I can dictate all those settings much more appropriately for racing. So I'm going to come in here, torch, reciprocating saw, somehow get rid of this mount, get rid of that mount. I've recorded all my settings, so I know when I put the new mount and upper control arm on here where my ballpark range is to weld that mount. So here's the setup I've designed. This is the first time probably anyone has ever seen this. This is kind of how it's going to work. You can imagine that these mounts have been cut off, and this A-arm is gone. So here you're looking at the new, I guess you can say tubular A-arm. It's not really tubular, it's cast iron. We are allowed aftermarket tubular A-arms. I have chosen to keep it an OEM Ford part for my front end. I'm proud of that. I like running as much OEM parts as I can. Easily replaceable, very cheap, can go to the junkyard. And this upper A-arm gives me the solution I need. So you can see here's the ball joint. That'll slip down into the spindle once I remove the old upper control arm. And my design here is this thing hanging in the air. That's going to be the new upper A-arm mount. You can see I've already got the upper A-arm bolted to the upper A-arm mount. What we do then to control the camber and caster is we shim. We can back these nuts off, and we can shim. We can put spacers or shims in between the mount and the upper control arm cross shaft. What that will do, say you put 2 or 3 washers on each side, that would reduce the negative camber by pushing the control arm out on the mount. So when I design this, when I weld it in place, I'm obviously going to set the upper cross shaft mount, upper control arm mount, as far towards the engine as I can on the right front, so I get the most negative camber. Say my goal is 8 degrees. Okay, so when I weld that down, without any shims in it, it'll be at 8 degrees. And then when I come in here and I want to set my chassis setup for racing, I'll go in here and put washers or shims, bring this upper control arm out, and say, for example, I want to race at 5 degrees negative camber on the right front. Well, I'll put enough shims in there to get that negative 5 degrees. The second setting we talked about is the caster. In order to set caster on here, it's kind of funny. You would go with an odd number of shims on the forward and back bolts. What that would do is kink the upper A-arm. And when it's kinked, you can see that ball joint. Say I put extra washers up front here. Well, it's going to kink. It's going to shove that ball joint just a little bit back. And of course, that's going to mess with the camber setting. So it's a trade-off. You put a couple spacers here, one spacer here. You check your caster, you check your camber. You get it close, but then you got to adjust it. So then, maybe you'll go 4 washers on the upper side and 1 washer back here as spacers. So it's just, you go back and forth. There's trade-offs, and then you finally come to an agreement of caster and camber. Then finally, the other things that I'm not going to get into real detail about is the anti-dive. I will be dictating the anti-dive on this car. That's something that I'm not going to share where I'm going to leave my anti-dive. And then the second thing would be the roll centers as well. So that's all going to have to do with how I decide to cut the angle here, the bottom angle here on this mount, and how it will be welded to the frame. So that's one angle, and then again that roll center, that's going to be dictated by how much I would cut off of this lower bar. The lower you drop the upper control arm mount, the more increase you're going to have in the upper A-arm mount. And what that does is it increases the roll center of the car. So that's stuff I've already designed, and I gotta when I weld this on, I gotta be cognizant of that. So there it is. So this is a pretty big job. So this is the intro to it. Probably the next video you'll see how I accomplished it. And so that's the 4 settings: camber, caster, anti-dive, roll center. And it's all dictated by the upper, you can see why it's dictated by the upper control arm mount and why these settings are so sensitive. And hopefully I did my homework, did my math right, and then I'll get to cutting, torching, grinding, welding, and everything worked as I designed, and the car is fast.